Welcome to The Workplace, a podcast by CalChamber. I'm Matthew Roberts, Associate General Counsel for Labor and Employment with the California Chamber of Commerce. Well, listeners, we are marching towards the end of the year, and for those of us who manage businesses and or employees, we're at that time to start evaluating our processes and whether we need to make any changes or even add new processes altogether for managing our workforce. To that end, we are in for a real treat today. Joining me on the podcast today is Jen Shirkani. Jen is a nationally recognized emotional intelligence expert, an author, and a business leader. She's a well-known keynote speaker at national and state conferences, universities, government agencies, and business organizations around the world. Jen is also the author of the book Ego versus EQ, which was nominated for the 2014 USA Best Book Award. In Ego versus EQ, Jen shares strategies for using emotional intelligence, or what she calls EQ, as a tool to avoid career derailment. We are so excited Jen is joining us today to help us better understand how emotional intelligence functions and how successful managers and leaders leverage the power of EQ to engage and motivate their employees and associates. Welcome to the podcast, Jen.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, I'm very excited for this. As always, I look forward to what we like to call some of the more soft skill stuff with managing our workforces. As I know you're aware, and as our listeners are definitely aware, we spend a lot of time on the hard, compliance stuff. And so I'm very excited to have somebody come in on some of the more soft skills and how we just interact with the people who are our employees and our associates. So why don't we start by having you tell us a little about your background. What is emotional intelligence, or what you refer to again as EQ? And honestly, how did you become interested or involved in these concepts in the first place?
All right. Well, I'm happy to be here. And I actually am a California native, grew up out in California and started my business there 25 years ago, and was in my corporate roles in some type of a learning and development function. I worked in a corporate training group for several organizations. And when emotional intelligence kind of came on the scene, there was a book published way back in 1995 that really introduced the concepts to business. And I became really interested in it because when we define emotional intelligence, it's essentially three things. It's first, someone's ability to recognize themselves. So it's having the self-awareness to know, what do I need to change? What are my moods? How are they affecting my behaviors? And then reading others and picking up signals that others send. So being able to read the room, as it were. And then responding appropriately using self-control. So managing the way I react in different settings, using that self-knowledge to know what I need to do differently. And as I studied it more and more, I was sort of a leadership development focused trainer. I realized, the foundation of self-awareness and empathy and self-control are so vital that I can't really teach you anything else until we focus on those. So that's when I decided that was really going to be my specialty.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm especially excited about this because I myself am a supervisor, and I always look internally on making sure that I manage, my employees well to begin with. But there's a lot that we'll get into with this piece and with regards to emotional intelligence that I think is going to be really important for anybody who just has interpersonal relationships at all at the workplace, which is a lot of us. I do the harassment prevention trainings for some of our businesses as a California native. We have that requirement out here in California. You got to do your harassment prevention training. Yes. And we always run across this question, which is, sometimes people won't tell you things straight out. Like, that comment bothers me, or the way that you're interacting bothers me. And so we always ask the question, well, how do you know if the way that you're engaging with somebody is good or bad? And, a lot of the attendees struggle with that. They're like, well, they tell you. I'm like, well, sometimes they, won't tell you, Jen. So to that end, when we talk about emotional intelligence, are people born with this? Is this something that's innate with us, or can we learn it in this context? How does that kind of work for us to kind of improve our emotional intelligence?
Well, the good news is it is learnable, and research has supported the fact that everyone can increase in their emotional intelligence over time. It is a mix, though, of nature and nurture. So we will have a few of the skills that you'll inherently, be comfortable using that might come to you more naturally. And then you've got others that you'll have to learn, and you might always be a little bit uncomfortable to use. So it's a mix of the two. And generally, people learn it in the workplace. We don't really teach these principles in most formal, education settings, even elementary ed or even high school. Some college, you might pick up a class that has a section on emotional intelligence in it. But for most of us, we have to learn this as we go. And most people do learn it and most people do increase it. So that's the good news.
Well, excellent. And I noticed you call it EQ, which kind of reminds me of the other acronym IQ, right? Kind of the
Uh-huh.
intelligence quotient thing. And so as we're talking about somebody learning something, this question kind of popped up for me really is, how is EQ different from somebody's IQ, the thing that we're more familiar with in terms of our, our book smarts or our
Right.
intelligence?
Right, yes, and there are differences. IQ is intelligence quotient, unlike EQ, emotional quotient. And IQ measures very specific things. So if someone were to take an IQ test, you'll get a score and it'll measure things like spatial reasoning, math and number skills, language, and recall. Those are all things that get measured on an IQ test. And for most people, the longitudinal studies show that IQ does peak at a certain age. And for most people, that's right around 19 or 20 years old. So,
Oh my goodness, really?
believe it or not, yes, I certainly feel a lot smarter than I did when I was 19. But if I were to retake an IQ test, every 10 years, you're not going to see much of a change in your score after about age 20.
Okay. Well, that's a little bit depressing, but I get it. So then how are we measuring EQ and how is that really different from IQ?
Yeah, so EQ can also be measured using an assessment. So there is several assessments actually out there that you can get a quantifiable score on your EQ. But again, longitudinal studies show that as people test every 5 years, 10 years, those scores will continue to increase, unlike IQ, which does not. And in the end, IQ, I think, has fallen a bit out of favor. It's a good predictor of academic success, but it hasn't really proven to be much of a good predictor of workplace success. So, really, the one that matters the most is emotional intelligence anyway. And that's the one that we can do something about. We can grow and increase in it. We can develop it in our employees. So, that's to me where the gold is.
Okay, and then your book is titled "Ego versus EQ." What is the difference
Mhm.
between those two terms? I mean, EQ, of course, now as we're talking about, is really your emotional intelligence
Mhm.
and the kind of things that we'll be talking about here. And for me, ego is often your viewpoint of yourself, how much you are in your own mind about yourself, kind of thing. And so, for me, can you explain differently for the rest of us what EQ and ego are and how are they different?
I think a lot of us associate ego with arrogance or overinflated sense of self. But as I've been studying this science, and particularly in the executive coaching work that I've done, I started to really notice that leaders in particular have a tendency to almost overuse their strengths to the point where any strength, if we overuse it, can hurt us. And as an executive leader, if you own your own business or you're in the C-suite of a business, it's hard to get the feedback that keeps you really grounded and, like you said, connects the way you think you are compared to how everyone else is seeing you. We get kind of in a bubble as a leader, and it's understandable. It's some of it is the natural dynamic between follower and leader. You don't want to tell your boss all the things you don't like about them or things you think they're doing wrong. And so it's easy sometimes as a leader to just kind of buy your own press in a way and convince yourself that everything is great because you're not really getting any negative feedback. But that ego, we have to be really smart about, how do I manage that knowledge, that self knowledge? How do I get feedback when I'm not naturally or organically going to get it so that it's not impeding my ability to use the emotional intelligence I have?
Okay, makes a lot of sense. So then, as we're talking about utilizing this emotional intelligence to, help balance our own egos and help balance our academic success or our internal intelligence. Because this is a lot of stuff that I will just say personally that I'll struggle with as a supervisor or as a leader, in the organization is understanding the feedback and understanding the feelings of others. What research support is out there for the value of this? Because that's, we have a lot of decisions. We have short amount of time and we have to kind of decide what do we invest in ourselves. So what's the value of investing in EQ for individuals?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And kind of like you said at the beginning, when I first got into this space, it was definitely seen as a soft skill. It was sort of like the nice to have piece on top of a technical skill. And what luckily the research has started to show, and the first real research done on this was done by an organization called Multi Health Systems out of Toronto. And the founder of that company was a clinical psychologist. And he's the one who actually coined the term EQ, emotional quotient. So he really laid out a lot of research that showed emotional intelligence helps build things like resiliency. So you'll be more resilient to stressors in your life if you have this foundation of emotional intelligence. Then Dan Goleman is probably the leading author on the topic related to business. And like I said, his first book came out back in 1995, and he has several books now that really have documented the power of this behavioral science and with very solid research on the benefits to leaders and organizations that can embrace this concept. And lately, Talent Smart is another organization actually based there in San Diego who has also done quite a bit of research on the benefits of emotional intelligence. So there's way more out there now than there was when I first got into this field that has really proven connections to really hard competencies around, stress tolerance and flexibility and impulse control, things that can really derail somebody's blow their technical skills out of the water if they're not doing the other stuff.
Well, good. So then there's this idea that we can invest in our improvement of EQ. And as you said, this is something that as we get older, we can actually get better at, unlike our IQ with that. So then for those organizational leaders who want to start to leverage this, right? Because again, when we're business leaders, we want to increase productivity, we want to improve performance. We also just want to make our businesses better so that way we enhance employee retention. How can organizational leaders leverage this EQ to do that?
First, I would say hire it. I can coach it, I can teach it, but if I can hire somebody with emotional intelligence, you can see how ahead of the game you are right there. So with our clients, we focus heavily on how do you interview, ask questions that reveal the presence or absence of emotional intelligence. How do you ask questions and then interpret their answers to know? Because again, if I can bring them into the organization already having some EQ, their odds of success go way up. Second of all, employee engagement is, I think, what we're all kind of after, because that hits on all the things you mentioned there, motivation and productivity. And each person's engagement drivers are unique. So as a leader, the more I get to know you, the more I understand the way you like to work, the way I notice the things you're good at, that you enjoy doing, and the things I can tell you don't like doing, the way you like to be rewarded or recognized, the more connection I can build with you. And so leaders with higher emotional intelligence pay attention to those little things, and they're able to then better connect with the team. That drives more loyalty and typically higher retention, and also stronger loyalty and trust.
And do you have, in your experience and your professional observations of this, do you have examples of how somebody has successfully done that, right? So this employee engagement that you talked about in that second step, where we're kind of acknowledging and recognizing, have you seen a good example that can kind of highlight what it is that we're talking about?
Yeah, so I have had one leader that I've worked with who, and I think it's tempting to want to treat everyone the same. And I think there is a strong message that we get hit a lot as leaders. You can't have any preferential treatment, right? So I have to treat everybody the same, and I've got to make sure that I've got equal treatment and everything is fair. And I think the challenge comes in, like I had one leader who wanted to give everybody a gift card. The company had like a $10 limit and they could give, little gift cards out as thank yous. And to be fair, quote unquote, the leader picked a gift card to like Starbucks and got everyone the same because he didn't want to, make any variation, wanted everyone to say they got the fair same thing. But on the team of, I think, 6 or 8 of them, like 3 of them don't drink coffee and never went to Starbucks and kind of felt like, well, I don't know if I guess I'll re-gift this or,
Right.
It lost its meaning because it really wasn't a place that they would normally go. And so I was thinking, what a missed opportunity there, because it really sent a message to everybody like, I don't really know you that well, or I really don't care where you like to go. This was easiest for me to just give you all the same. And I think our younger generation especially is rejecting that idea that we're all the same. They like individuality, they like uniqueness. And so you can still be fair, but also meet people where they are and provide unique reward and recognition that matters to them. And the more you do that, the easier time I think people will have to see that you know them, you get them, you see them, and you value them.
Yeah, that's an awesome example because that's such a small thing. And I think,
Right.
just intuitively, like you said, I just want to be equal, right? Here,
Uh-huh.
$10 gift card to Starbucks, $10 gift card to Starbucks. But you're right. When you receive something like that, if somebody asks a simple question of, hey, do you like coffee? Or like, hey, we're going to go get a coffee. And you just observe that 3 people don't ever get coffee.
Right.
That should tell you, okay, maybe I don't get a coffee gift card for everything. It's such a small thing, but seems to hold a lot of power. So then the final question for you on this show today is really what's the most important next step, the next thing for managers and HR professionals who are listening to this show today can you take to use their EQ to benefit their organization and their employees? What is the next thing they should do right after closing out this show today?
Well, I like to say, you need to build a business case for investment of this. And it can be done. One technique I've seen used is a benchmark study where they take high performers, do an EQ assessment on them, watch to see what they share in common, what are some of the skills that they're all high in, and then those are important for our company, our organization, our culture. Those are things we should be interviewing for, and those are things we should be developing in some type of a training or coaching initiative. So that's one way to be smart about what skills you want to look at and develop. I think we also need to be smart about connecting the business case to the things that matter to an organization. So how do you connect emotional intelligence to turnover? Can you see a department that a leader has higher EQ, and what does their turnover look like? Odds are it's probably going to be lower. So you can build some business case for the things that are important. Another technique I've used is look at the performance reviews. If you're doing annual reviews, usually there is a section in there for what we might call the soft skills, right? How the teamwork and collaboration side, or conflict management side, or stress management side. Those are all pieces of emotional intelligence. So let's take a look at the scores in those areas and how do we better round out employees in them and provide solutions for those that might be struggling in that area. We don't want to lose a highly technically skilled person simply because they're struggling to collaborate, and just the manager giving feedback may not be enough for them. They might need a little bit more from a one-on-one coaching standpoint, or outside assessments or things like that.
Well, excellent. Jen, thank you so much for joining me today with this fascinating discussion of emotional intelligence. I know it's not something that we consider in the day-to-day, and so I'm glad we were able to have this discussion and how to utilize it in the workplace. So again, thank you for joining me today, Jen.
My pleasure.
And thank you, listeners, for joining this discussion on the workplace. Please share and subscribe to CalChamber's podcast by visiting calchamber.com.